found a book in the restricted section that had my name written inside, but I'd never been to that library before in my life. My name is James. I'm 28, and this happened 6 months ago when I moved to a new city for work. I'm a software engineer, pretty logical and skeptical by nature, which is why what happened at the Riverside Public Library still bothers me. I'd been in town for about 2 weeks and was looking for a quiet place to work on weekends. My apartment was small and noisy, so I decided to check out the main public library downtown. It was one of those beautiful old buildings from the early 1900s. 3 stories of dark wood, high ceilings, and that distinct old book smell. I got my library card and spent a few hours working on my laptop in the reading room. The place was perfect, quiet, comfortable, and the Wi-Fi was decent. I decided I'd make it my regular weekend spot. On my 3rd visit, I was exploring the building during a study break. The library had a lot of interesting architecture, winding staircases, alcoves with reading chairs, and entire sections that seemed rarely visited. On the 2nd floor, I found a door marked Restricted Section, Staff Only. The door was old, heavy wood, with a brass handle, and it was slightly ajar. I could see a narrow staircase leading up to what I assumed was the 3rd floor. I knew I probably shouldn't, but curiosity got the better of me. I checked to make sure no librarians were watching and slipped through the door. The staircase was dimly lit and creaked with every step. At the top, I found myself in what appeared to be an old archive section. Rows of floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with ancient-looking books and documents. The air was thick with dust, and it was clear this area wasn't accessed very often. I walked between the shelves, reading the spines of various books. Most were Old Town records, historical documents and reference materials from decades ago. Nothing particularly interesting. Then I reached a section near the back corner, and something caught my eye. There was a book jutting out slightly from the shelf, like someone had been looking at it recently and hadn't pushed it back properly. The book itself was unremarkable. A dark green leather cover with no title on the spine, but I felt drawn to it for some reason. I pulled it out and opened to the first page. Inside the front cover, written in neat cursive handwriting, was my name, James Mitchell. My full name, spelled correctly. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was clearly an old book. The pages were yellowed, the binding was worn. It had to be at least 50 or 60 years old. But how could my name be written inside a book from decades before I was born? I flipped through the pages. It appeared to be some kind of journal or logbook, with handwritten entries dated from 1962 to 1964. The entries were brief notes about library operations, books checked out, repairs needed, acquisitions made. But scattered throughout were entries that made my blood run cold. James M. will arrive in November. Prepare the usual materials. James M. showed interest in the restricted section today. Anticipated. James M. discovered the journal as expected. The pattern continues. These entries were dated from 1963, more than 30 years before I was born, but they were clearly referring to me, someone named James M., who would visit the library, access the restricted section, and find this exact journal. How was that possible? I kept reading. The entries became more specific. James M. works in technology, relocated from the East, follows the same path as the others. Every detail matched my situation perfectly. But these entries were written decades ago. The final entry, dated March 15, 1964, simply read, James M. will understand eventually. They all do. The library remembered. I closed the book, my hands shaking. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe the previous tenant of my apartment was also named James Mitchell, and this was meant for him. Maybe it was a weird coincidence, but the specific details, technology work, relocated from the East, finding the restricted section, those were too accurate to be coincidence. I heard footsteps on the staircase. Someone was coming up to the restricted section. I quickly shoved the journal back on the shelf and tried to look casual as a librarian emerged from the stairway. She was elderly, probably in her 70s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. This area is off limits to patrons, she said, not unkindly, but firmly. Sorry, the door was open. I was just curious about the old archives. She studied me for a moment. You're James, aren't you? The new patron who's been coming on weekends. Yes. How did you know? I make it my business to know the regular visitors. Come, you shouldn't be up here. As she led me back down the staircase, I wanted to ask her about the journal, about the entries with my name, but something stopped me. The way she'd said the new patron, like there had been others before me. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the journal. I researched the library's history online and found something interesting. The library had a reputation for strange occurrences going back decades. There were old newspaper articles about patrons who claimed to find books with personal information about themselves. A few stories about people who said the library knew things about them that it shouldn't. Most articles treated these as urban legends or the imaginings of eccentric book lovers. But one article from 1985 caught my attention. It mentioned a man named James Morrison, who had visited the library and claimed to find a journal with his name in it, in a restricted section. He'd reported it to the library staff, who'd dismissed it as a prank or coincidence. James Morrison had the same initials as me, JM, and according to the article, he'd been a computer programmer who had recently moved to the city. Just like me, I decided to return to the restricted section. Rules be damned. I needed to see that journal again. I waited until a busy Saturday afternoon when the staff would be distracted. I slipped through the same door and climbed the stairs to the archive section. The journal was exactly where I'd left it, but when I opened it, there were new entries. Entries dated from the past 2 weeks. James M. researched library history, predictable behavior. James M. discovered the Morrison article. The connection strengthens. James M. returned to restricted section 11/14/2024. Cycle continues. Today's date was November 14th. Someone was watching me, documenting my movements, adding to this journal in real time. But the handwriting was identical to the entries from 1963. Same ink, same style, same aged appearance on the paper. How could new entries look decades old? I heard footsteps again. This time I wasn't leaving without answers. The same elderly librarian appeared at the top of the stairs. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You came back," she said. "They always do. What is this?" I held up the journal. "How does this book have entries about me from before I was born?" She sighed and gestured to a reading chair in the corner. "Sit down, James. I'll try to explain, though. You may not believe me." I sat, clutching the journal. "This library has been here since 1887, she began. But it was built on the site of something much older. There was a private collection here, maintained by a group of scholars who believed that places could have memory, that buildings could record the patterns of human behavior across time. That's not scientifically possible. No, it's not. But that doesn't mean it isn't true. The library remembers certain people, specific patterns. Every 20 or 30 years, someone fitting a particular profile will move to this city, discover the library, and eventually find their way to the restricted section. People with the initials JM. Not just the initials, the entire pattern, the profession, the circumstances of arrival, the personality type that leads to curiosity about restricted areas. The library recognizes these patterns and anticipates them. That journal has entries from 1963 about me. That's impossible. The journal doesn't predict the future. It records patterns from outside linear time. The library exists in a kind of temporal loop for certain individuals. What happened to James Morrison in 1985? What's happening to you now? What will happen to the next James M. in 2045? The library experiences all of it simultaneously. I stared at her. "You're saying this building exists outside of normal time?" "Only partially. Only in the restricted sections, and only for people who match certain patterns. Most patrons never experience anything unusual. But people like you, you're part of the library's memory, past and future. This is insane." "Yes, it is. But you've seen the evidence. You've read entries about yourself, written before you were born. How else do you explain it?" I couldn't explain it. Nothing about this made rational sense. "What happens to people who are part of this pattern?" I asked. "Nothing bad, if that's what you're worried about. You'll live a normal life, but you'll always feel drawn to this library. You'll keep coming back, and eventually, you'll understand that you're part of something larger than yourself, a pattern that exists across decades, connecting people who never met." The journal mentioned the others. "How many people has this happened to?" I've been working here for 40 years. I've met 3 before you. There will be more after you. Each one discovers the journal. Each one struggles to understand, and each one eventually accepts that some mysteries don't have rational explanations. She stood up. Keep the journal if you want, or return it to the shelf for the next person. Either way, you're part of the library's memory now. She left me alone in the restricted section. I sat there for a long time, holding the journal, trying to process everything she'd told me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of an eccentric old librarian, but I couldn't deny what I'd seen with my own eyes. I eventually returned the journal to its spot on the shelf and left the library. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but I did. The next weekend, and the weekend after that, the library felt like the only place in the city where I truly belonged. A few weeks ago, out of curiosity, I went back to the restricted section one more time. I found the journal and opened to the last page. There was a new entry dated yesterday. James M. has accepted his place in the pattern. He will return regularly for the next several years. In 2047, the next JM will arrive. The library will remember. I still don't understand how any of this is possible. I've tried to research temporal anomalies, building memory theory, anything that might provide a rational explanation. I've found nothing satisfying. What I do know is this: I'm part of something I didn't choose and can't fully comprehend. The library has somehow recorded my existence before I was born and continues to document my life in a journal written decades ago. Sometimes I wonder about James Morrison and the others who came before me. Did they spend years trying to understand? Did they eventually make peace with the mystery? And I wonder about the person who will come in 2047, another JM, who will move to this city, discover the library, and find that same journal with their name written inside. Will they believe it? Will they understand? Or will they, like me, spend the rest of their lives coming back to the library, looking for answers that exist outside of rational explanation? I still don't have those answers, but I've accepted that some places remember us in ways we can't understand, and some patterns repeat across time in ways that logic can't explain. The library knows who I am. It knew before I arrived, and it will remember after I'm gone. And somehow that's both terrifying and comforting at the same time. The university library where I worked the night shift had a regular patron who visited every evening at midnight. The problem was, she'd been dead for 15 years. My name is Emma, I'm 32, and I worked as a night shift librarian at Westfield University for 3 years. The hours were difficult, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., but the pay was good, and I needed flexibility for my graduate studies. Most nights were quiet. A few students cramming for exams, occasionally someone doing late-night research, but mostly, I had the massive 4-story building to myself. I'd do my cataloging work, shelve returned books, and help the rare patron who needed assistance. After a few months on the job, I started noticing a pattern. Every night, right around midnight, I'd see a young woman studying in the same spot on the 3rd floor. She was probably in her early 20s, always wore a blue cardigan, and sat at the same study carrel near the philosophy section. Her routine was consistent. She'd be there when I did my midnight rounds, always with the same textbooks and notebooks spread out, always deeply focused on her work. What struck me as odd was that I never saw her arrive or leave. She'd just be there at midnight and gone by 1 a.m. In a building I was supposed to be monitoring constantly, she somehow slipped in and out without me noticing. After a few weeks of this pattern, I decided to approach her. It was my job to know who was in the building, especially during late night hours when security was a concern. As I walked toward her study carrel around midnight, I could see her clearly, dark hair pulled back, blue cardigan, bent over her books. But the closer I got, the more the details seemed to blur, like looking at something through slightly foggy glass. When I was about 10 feet away, I called out, "Excuse me, the library closes at 4 a.m., but I need to keep track of who's here for security purposes. Can I see your student ID?" She looked up at me. Her face was familiar in a way I couldn't place, like someone you've seen in old photographs but never met in person. "I'm just studying," she said softly. "I won't cause any trouble." "I'm sure you won't, but I still need to see your ID. It's policy." She hesitated, then said, "I don't have it with me. I'm sorry." "What's your name? I can look you up in the system." "Catherine. Catherine Price." Something about the name triggered a memory, but I couldn't quite place it. "Okay, Catherine. Are you a current student?" "Yes. Philosophy major." "Well, if you're going to study here regularly, I need to make sure you're checking in properly at the front desk. Campus security requires it for after-hours access." She nodded, but didn't say anything else. I felt awkward standing there, so I moved on to finish my rounds. When I came back 15 minutes later, she was gone. Over the next few nights, I kept seeing Catherine in the same spot at midnight. But every time I tried to approach her or start a conversation, she'd give brief answers and then disappear shortly after. I decided to look her up in the university system. We had access to student records for verification purposes, so I searched for Catherine Price in the current student database. No result. I tried variations of the name Kate Price, Kathy Price, Catherine Price. Nothing. I expanded the search to include recent graduates. Still nothing. Then I tried the alumni database, going back several years. That's when I found her. Catherine Ann Price, philosophy major, enrolled from 2006 to 2009, but she'd never graduated. According to the records, she died during her senior year in November 2009. 15 years ago. The record didn't include details about how she died, just a notation that her student status had been changed to deceased, and her scholarship had been terminated. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman I'd been talking to, who I saw every night studying on the 3rd floor, had been dead for 15 years. That night, when Catherine appeared at her usual spot at midnight, I approached her differently. I sat down at the carrel across from hers and spoke gently. "Catherine, can I ask you something? How long have you been studying here?" She looked up, her expression unreadable. "A while. I have exams coming up." "What class are you studying for?" "Philosophy 401, Epistemology, Professor Davidson's class." I knew the philosophy department well. I'd shelved books in that section hundreds of times. Professor Davidson had retired in 2010. Right after Catherine would have died. "Catherine, what year is it?" She looked confused. "It's 2009, November. Why? And how old are you?" 21. "I'll be 22 in December." She paused. "Why are you asking me these questions?" I didn't know how to answer. How do you tell someone they've been dead for 15 years? "I'm just trying to understand something," I said carefully. "Do you remember anything unusual happening recently? Anything that felt different?" She thought for a moment. "I've been really tired lately, having trouble concentrating. Sometimes I feel like I'm forgetting things, like there are gaps in my memory." "What's the last clear memory you have?" "I was studying for my epistemology final. Right here, in this spot. It was late, past midnight. I remember feeling exhausted, like I couldn't keep my eyes open. And then, she trailed off, looking distressed. I don't remember what happened next, just that I need to study. I have exams." My heart broke for her. She didn't know. She'd been dead for 15 years, but somehow she was still here, still trying to finish her studies, still caught in that last night before whatever happened to her. "Catherine, I need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear." She looked at me with sudden fear in her eyes. "What?" "The year isn't 2009, it's 2024. You've been here, in this library, for a very long time." "That's not possible. I was just studying yesterday. I have exams next week." "I know it seems that way, but something happened to you in November 2009. You didn't finish your exams." Her form started to flicker slightly, like a projected image losing stability. No, that's not right. I'm here. I'm studying. I'm alive." "I'm so sorry, Catherine. I don't know exactly what happened. But according to university records, you died 15 years ago." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick. I'm not trying to upset you. I just want to help you understand. I don't need your help. I need to study. I need to finish my degree." Her voice was rising, filled with panic and confusion. And then she was gone, not walking away, just suddenly absent, like she'd never been there at all. I sat alone at the study carrel, my hands shaking. What had I just done? The next night, I did research. I found old newspaper archives and discovered what had happened to Catherine Price. She'd been studying in the library late one night in November 2009 when she'd suffered a brain aneurysm. She died quietly at her study carrel, alone, with her books open in front of her. Security had found her the next morning when they opened the library. She'd been gone for hours, but she'd looked peaceful, like she was sleeping over her textbooks. She'd been 3 weeks away from completing her senior year, 3 weeks from graduating with honors. She'd spent her entire final night trying to prepare for exams she'd never take. For the next several weeks, I didn't see Catherine. Her usual spot remained empty at midnight. I worried that confronting her with the truth had somehow disrupted whatever allowed her to appear. But then, about a month later, she was back. I approached her carefully. "Catherine, are you okay?" She looked up, and there was something different in her expression, a clarity that hadn't been there before. "I remember now," she said quietly. "I remember that night. I was so tired, my head hurt, and then, nothing. Just this feeling that I needed to keep studying, that I couldn't stop until I was finished. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told you like that. No, you did the right thing. I've been confused for so long, not understanding why time felt wrong, why nobody else was ever here, why I couldn't remember anything except needing to study. What happens now?" She smiled sadly. "I don't know. I still feel drawn to this spot, to these books. But now I understand that I'm holding on to something I'll never finish. Maybe it's time to let go. You worked so hard, you deserve to graduate. I thought graduation mattered more than anything. But now, I don't know what matters anymore. I've been here for 15 years, trying to pass exams that don't exist, working toward a degree I'll never receive." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, Catherine spoke again. "Thank you for telling me the truth, even though it hurt. Will you keep coming back?" "I don't think so, now that I know. This place feels different. Less like where I need to be, and more like where I got stuck. I think I can leave now." "Where will you go?" She smiled. "I have no idea, but it has to be better than spending eternity studying for a final exam." That was the last time I saw Catherine. Her study carrel remained empty at midnight for the rest of my time working at that library. I left the job about 6 months later. The night shift was taking too much of a toll on my own studies. But before I left, I did one thing for Catherine. I contacted the philosophy department and explained that I'd been researching a former student who died before graduating. I asked if there was any way the university could award a posthumous degree to Catherine Price, given that she'd completed all her coursework and was only 3 weeks from graduation when she died. It took some paperwork and committee approvals, but the university agreed. 6 months later, they held a special ceremony and awarded Catherine Ann Price a posthumous Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy. Her family was there. Parents and a younger brother, who'd only been a teenager when she died. They were grateful that the university was acknowledging her work and dedication. I didn't tell them about the years I'd spent watching their daughter study in the library at midnight, still trying to finish what she'd started. Some things are better left mysterious. But I hope that wherever Catherine is now, she knows she finally got her degree, that all those years of studying weren't wasted, that someone remembered her dedication and made sure it was recognized. The library still stands, and I'm sure other night shift librarians work there now. I wonder if they ever see a young woman in a blue cardigan studying on the 3rd floor at midnight, or if Catherine finally found peace and moved on to whatever comes after. We let go of unfinished business. I'll never know for certain, but I hope she's free now, no longer bound to that study carrel, no longer trapped in an endless loop of preparation for exams that never came. Sometimes the most haunting thing about libraries isn't what you find in the books. It's the stories of people who loved learning so much that even death couldn't make them leave. I worked in the basement archives of the city library, cataloging old donations. That's where I found the book that kept adding new chapters about things that hadn't happened yet. My name is David. I'm 35, and I've been working as an archivist for the city's main library for 7 years. Most of my job involves processing donated collections, old books, personal papers, historical documents that people give to the library when they're cleaning out estates or downsizing. It's quiet work done mostly in the basement archives, where the public rarely visits. Just me, decades worth of accumulated donations, and the occasional historian who needs access to specific documents. Last year, I received a large donation from the estate of a local writer who died at age 94. The donation included hundreds of books from his personal library, manuscripts of his published and unpublished work, and boxes of personal correspondence. I spent weeks cataloging the collection. Most of it was standard stuff: first editions of his published novels, draft manuscripts with handwritten edits, letters from publishers and fellow writers. But buried in one of the later boxes, I found something unusual. It was a leather-bound book with no title on the cover or spine. The pages were handwritten in neat, precise handwriting, and it appeared to be some kind of journal or creative writing exercise. The first entry was dated January 5th. Begin recording. The book remembers what will be. Curious phrasing. I flipped through the pages and found that the journal contained short descriptions of events, each one dated. They read like news summaries or historical notes. March 15, 1963. City Council approves new library building. Construction begins fall. November 22, 1963. National tragedy. President Kennedy assassinated in Dallas. July 20, 1969. Moon landing successful. Armstrong's words will be remembered. The entries continued chronologically through the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. All of them described major events, both local and national, that had actually happened. At first, I thought it was just a personal journal where the writer had recorded significant events as they occurred. But then I noticed something strange. The handwriting never changed. Every entry, from 1963 to the present day, was written in exactly the same handwriting, with the same ink, on paper that had aged uniformly. It wasn't like a journal that had been written in over decades, with natural variations in penmanship and materials. It looked like someone had sat down and written the entire thing in one session, but documented events spanning more than 60 years. Even stranger, the entries continued past the writer's death in 2023. The most recent entry was dated just 2 weeks ago. October 15, 2024, new archivist David discovers the book. Pattern recognition begins. That was my name. And October 15 was the day I'd opened the box containing this journal. I felt a chill run down my spine. How could a book written by someone who died a year ago contain an entry about me finding it 2 weeks ago? I kept reading. The next entries described things that hadn't happened yet. November 30, 2024, major storm causes flooding in downtown district. Library basement sustains water damage. December 18, 2024, City Library announces budget cuts. Archives department will be reduced. January 7, 2025. David leaves position at library. Collection remains incomplete. These entries were written in the same handwriting as everything else, on pages that looked just as aged as the rest of the journal, but they described future events as if they'd already happened. When I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, maybe this was some kind of creative writing project, a fictional journal from a time traveler or prophet. Maybe the writer had been working on a novel about precognition. But the entries about real historical events were too accurate, and the entry about me finding the book was too specific. I decided to keep the journal with me and observe whether the predicted events actually occurred. If the November 30 storm happened, I'd know something genuinely strange was going on. That night, I took the journal home and read through it more carefully. There were hundreds of entries, some describing major world events, others documenting small local occurrences, all written in that same unchanging handwriting. I found an entry about the writer's own death. August 12, 2023. Final transition. The book continues without me. Future readers will carry the weight of knowing. August 12, 2023 was indeed the date the writer had died, according to his estate documents. November 3rd arrived. I'd been checking weather forecasts obsessively, and meteorologists were predicting clear skies for the entire week. No storms on the horizon. But on the morning of November 3rd, an unexpected weather system moved in from the south. By noon, we were experiencing severe thunderstorms. By evening, downtown was flooding. The library basement, where I worked, took on 2 inches of water. We lost some materials that had been stored on bottom shelves, though fortunately most of the collection was elevated. exactly as the journal had predicted. I pulled out the book and read the next entry, November 3rd, 2024. Major storm causes flooding in downtown district. Library basement sustains water damage. Word for word, what had just happened. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I tell someone, show them the journal? But who would believe me? It sounded insane. A book that predicts the future, written by a dead man, containing entries that continue to describe events even after his death. I decided to wait and see if the next prediction came true. The entry about budget cuts was dated December 18th, more than a month away. In the meantime, I researched the writer, whose estate had donated the book. His name was Harold Weber, and he'd been a moderately successful author of literary fiction. Nothing in his published work suggested any interest in time travel, prophecy, or the supernatural. I found an obituary from August 2023. It mentioned that he'd spent the last years of his life organizing his papers and personal effects, wanting to ensure his literary legacy was preserved. His family had donated his collection to the library, as per his wishes. December 18th arrived. I was at work when the library director called an emergency staff meeting. Budget cuts from the city meant we'd have to reduce operating hours and staff. The archives department, being least visible to the public, would see the biggest cuts. I'd be reduced from full-time to part-time, starting in January. Another prediction from the journal, exactly as written. That evening, I opened the journal to the entry about myself leaving the position. January 7th, 2025. David leaves position at library. Collection remains incomplete. That was less than a month away. According to the book, I was going to quit my job in January, but I had no plans to quit. Despite the cut to part-time, I needed this job. I couldn't afford to leave without something else lined up. For the first time, I had advanced knowledge of what the journal claimed would happen, and I was determined to prove it wrong. I would not quit on January 7th. I would stay in my position and keep working, and the prediction would fail. Maybe that would break whatever power this book had. Over the Christmas holidays, I kept the journal locked in my desk at work. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to know what else it might predict. But in early January, something unexpected happened. I received a job offer from a private research institution across the country. It was a significant salary increase, better benefits, and work I was actually passionate about. The position would start immediately if I was interested. The offer came on January 3rd. They needed an answer by January 5th. I struggled with the decision. Taking the job would mean the journal's prediction came true. I would leave the library in early January, but staying would mean passing up an incredible opportunity just to prove a book wrong. In the end, logic won. I accepted the position. I gave my notice on January 6th, effective January 7th. The prediction had come true, but not in the way I'd expected. It wasn't some supernatural force compelling me to quit. It was simply that circumstances aligned in a way that made leaving the logical choice. On my last day, January 7th, I sat in the basement archives surrounded by the partially catalogued collection from Harold Weber's estate. The journal's entry had been right. The collection would remain incomplete. My replacement wouldn't start for several weeks, and they'd likely prioritize other projects. I pulled out the journal one last time and read beyond my own entry. March 23th, 2025. New archivist Sarah begins processing Weber collection. She will find what David missed. June 14th, 2025. Sarah discovers second journal. Understanding begins. There was a second journal. I'd gone through every box in Weber's collection. If there was another journal, I would have found it. Unless it wasn't there yet. Unless it would appear later, after I left. I flipped to the end of the book, looking for the final entry. The last page contained a note dated December. The book closes. Final entry. Future readers will understand what past readers could not. The book does not predict the future. It records the present from a perspective that exists outside linear time. What you call tomorrow has already happened from where the book exists. Time is not a line but a circle, and the book stands at the center, observing all points simultaneously. I sat there for a long time trying to understand what I'd read. The journal wasn't predicting the future. It was simply recording events from a perspective that could observe all of time at once. Past, present, and future all existed simultaneously from wherever or whenever this book existed, which meant everything that would happen had already happened from the book's perspective. My choices, my decisions, the path my life would take, all of it was already recorded in pages that had been written decades ago. I wanted to be disturbed by that idea. It suggested a universe without free will, where everything was predetermined and observed. But maybe it wasn't about predetermination. Maybe the book simply existed at the end of time, looking back at everything that had occurred, and someone, Harold Weber or whoever had actually written this journal, had found a way to bring that record back to the present. I don't know. I'll never know. I left the journal in my desk for my replacement to find. Along with it, I left a note. This book contains accurate records of events from 1963 to 2099. I don't understand how or why. I've verified multiple entries about future events, and they all came true. You'll have to decide for yourself what that means. I moved across the country and started my new job. Life continued normally. I didn't think about the journal for several months. Then in late March, I got an email from someone named Sarah. She introduced herself as the new archivist at the city library and said she'd found my note with the journal. "I thought you should know," her email said. "I found the second journal you mentioned. It was hidden in a false bottom of one of the storage boxes, exactly where the first journal said it would be. The second journal contains entries about my life, just like the first one had entries about yours. I don't know what to make of this." I wrote back asking if she'd be willing to share what the second journal said about her future. She responded a week later, "I've decided not to read ahead. The first journal told you about leaving your position, and you left. It told me I'd find a second journal, and I did, but I don't want to know what comes next. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. I'm going to finish cataloging the Weber collection, and then store both journals in the restricted archives. Maybe someone in the future will understand what we can't." That was the last I heard from Sarah. I respected her decision not to read ahead, though part of me was curious about what the second journal contained. A few months ago, out of curiosity, I looked up Harold Weber's published works again. I found something I'd missed before. His very first novel, published in 1965, was titled The Book of All Time. I ordered a copy and read it. The novel is about a man who discovers a journal that records all of human history from beginning to end, written from a perspective outside of linear time. The protagonist struggles with whether to read ahead in the journal and learn his own future, ultimately deciding that the burden of knowledge is too great. The novel ends with the protagonist leaving the journal for someone else to find, along with a note warning them about the weight of knowing what will come. It's almost identical to what happened to me. Did Harold Weber actually possess a journal that could observe all of time? Or was the journal I found an elaborate art project, a way for him to turn his fictional novel into something that felt real for whoever discovered it? Maybe he planted fake predictions that could be interpreted to match random events. Maybe the specific details about me were lucky guesses, or vague enough to apply to many situations. Maybe the whole thing was designed to make the finder question reality and free will, just like his fictional protagonist. Or maybe somewhere in the basement archives of that library, there really is a book that exists outside of time, a book that can see all of human history simultaneously, a book that records what has been, what is, and what will be, all written in the same hand at the same moment. I'll never know which explanation is true. What I do know is this: I made choices that the journal had already recorded. Whether those choices were predetermined or simply observed from a perspective beyond linear time, I can't say. But I think about it sometimes, late at night, wondering if my life is already written in a journal somewhere, wondering if someone is reading about this exact moment. Me, sitting here, thinking about a mysterious book I found in a library basement, and wondering if that book knows how my story ends, even though I'm still living it. I don't have answers. I only have questions and a memory of holding something in my hands that shouldn't have been possible. Maybe that's all any of us really have. Questions about whether our paths are chosen or observed, whether we're writing our stories or simply living out pages that were recorded long ago. I left the library, just like the journal said I would, but I'll never know if I left because the book predicted it, or if the book simply recorded what I was always going to choose. And perhaps that distinction doesn't matter. Perhaps the future and the past are the same thing, viewed from different points on a circle we can't see. The book knew my name before I found it. It knew when I would leave. It probably knows where I am right now. And somewhere, on pages written decades ago, it might already know how this story ends. But I don't, and maybe that's the only freedom any of us really have, the freedom to not know what comes next, even if someone, somewhere is already reading about it.